I'll
you're
take
talking
it.
about the German Luftwaffe? For
Yes.
a second there, I almost thought you were going to say a Luftwaffle. And I was thinking, flying pancakes? German Luftwaffles? What are we talking about,
Shit.
schnapps or breakfast?
Somebody's hungry. Boy. I'm sure bacon's going to enter the conversation at some point, too.
Bacon.
Oh, indeed.
Shoot the Core Cast.
Welcome to Shoot the Corecast, the official companion podcast to the RF Generation Shmup Club. This is a family-friendly shmup-themed podcast that serves flying pancakes with 2 eggs sunny side up. As always, I'm Addicted, also known as Addicted to Shmups, and with me...
I am MetalFRO, also known throughout other parts of the web as the Game Boy Guru.
And this month, we're going to be taking a look at Strikers 1945... Number 2. But before we get to that, let's take a look at our sponsor, RF Generation. We have the community playthrough, which we just did for the month of July with Strikers 1945 2. I'd like to also thank the Playcast. They're playing their game for July was Super Mario Land 1 and 2, I believe, correct?
Yes, it was. So that was right up my alley, of course.
Oh, I wish I would have a chance to play, but I got too hooked on Strikers. At rfgeneration.com, we have a database of tons and tons of games. I'm trying to remember how many they have on there. I know it's in the tens of thousands on there. And they have, it's not just USA-based, they have Japanese, they have Brazilian, and variants, all sorts of stuff in there. So if you're trying to make sure that your collection is up to date and has everything that you need to have in there, definitely take a look at rfgeneration.com. And speaking of rfgeneration.com, they're currently running a NES challenge where they're trying to beat the entire NES license library within a year. That's run by Crabmaster 2000.
Yes, and I want to say that someone said the other day that we are somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2/3 of the way through the library.
All right, congratulations.
We're about on schedule, but maybe slightly ahead. And so definitely, if you like old NES games and there may be a couple in your backlog that you want to play and knock off the list, check it out and see if anything that we've got that hasn't been beat yet is something that you want to tackle.
Yeah, if you want to tackle something easy like Xanic. Just kidding on that one. All right, so as we mentioned, the RF Generation Shmup Club played Strikers 1945 2 for the month of July. That includes the arcade, Saturn, PlayStation, which in the PlayStation version in the US is called Strikers 1945 because the first one never came out. There's the PS2 collection that came out in Japan that includes the 1945 1 and 2, and of course the Switch. I ended up trying this on the Saturn to start, but then I switched over to the PS2. I found that the controller I have for my Saturn needs to be fixed up a little bit, so it's a little bit easier for me to use the DualShock. What versions did you play?
Primarily the Sega Saturn version through most of the month, and then after I moved into my new apartment, I set up the Switch and streamed that a couple of times, and actually played that in Tate mode.
Nice. You using the flip grip for that?
No, streaming it that way. So I had my vertical monitor set up, and then played on that, and then did the stream that way.
Gotcha. Okay. Pretty cool. I got to try that out one of these days. Would you like to take a look at our participants for the month?
Absolutely. So we had myself, MetalFRO, and of course Addicted. We also had Zoido, Easy Racer, Vic Viper Mark II, Duke Togo, Mr. Stubbs, Coin Tengoku, Chris Tap 76, and then a couple of participants via Twitter in Nefarious Wes and Sir Flash. And so, as we've been doing the last couple of months, completely and totally ripping off and copying the Playcast, we're doing a question of the month. So earlier today I tweeted out and I said, what shmup do you know is objectively well designed, but you can't get into it, and why? And got some good responses on that. At Fran_Fricky on Twitter there says, Raiden Saga, especially 3. And by Raiden Saga, I just assume he means the entire Raiden mainline series. He says, perfect controls, perfect gunplay, but can't understand and prevent the blanking enemy patterns. Can't dodge a single wave of bullets in this saga. Butterfingers. I believe the bosses are massive bullet sponges. Feel every combat like an endless panic room. And I can identify with that because Raiden boss fights are always a little bit... what's the word I'm looking for? They're always a little bit intense, you know?
I would use the word panic-inducing.
Ah, yes. Well, that tracks. Stephen Eider, at Stephen Eider, says, bullet hells in general. Just too much work for me. Can't enjoy any of the art either. Just bullet designs everywhere. And I know he's not the only one. You know, Duke Togo has said that he's not keen on bullet hell games. He enjoys watching them, but in terms of playing them, I know he's said in the past that he's just not adapted well to them. Zoido, who joined us on the playthrough, tweeted at me and said, Radiant Silver Gun. I always mix up the different weapons, miss enemy formations, and run into walls. And I haven't put that much time into Radiant Silver Gun, but I have the digital version on the Xbox 360, and I can totally understand where he's coming from. Because there are so many different weapons in the game, it's easy to get confused as to which button fires which weapon, and then kind of figuring out what weapon works best in different scenarios. And so it's easy to use the wrong weapon and then get hit by a bullet because you didn't take out the enemy that hit you with that bullet with the right weapon soon enough. So I can definitely identify with Zoido on that. Kiwi BB33 says, Ikaruga seems to be a popular answer of late. I don't feel this way, but I know a lot of people do. And Mark MSX echoed that and says Ikaruga for sure, although he didn't explain why. So I'll have to give him a hard time about that. And then EC2151 says, for me at the moment, it's Battle Garega. It still hasn't clicked with me, or any Yagawa game, to be honest. So some interesting responses there. Ikaruga I kind of expected, but Raiden was an interesting one, I thought. And Battle Garega, I understand, but that's kind of one of those games that's considered a holy grail shoot 'em up by a lot of the hardcore shooter community, and so it's interesting that that one, you know, made the list.
Yeah, what would you say your answer to be?
You know, it's weird because I came up with this question and I tweeted it out, and then I've been racking my brain since then trying to figure out what my answer is. And I'm not sure that I have a concrete answer for it. I can say that I haven't played any of them yet, but I will say that I haven't generated enough interest for myself in the Toho series yet. I do want to play them at some point, but the characters and the aesthetics in the games just don't appeal to me that much. And so some of what draws a lot of people into the Toho community doesn't really do much for me. So for me, it's going to be, you know, either we pick one of those games to do for a monthly playthrough, or, you know, I just go and get one and play it so that I can kind of have that experience. But right now, that is what I have to say, because I just don't have any interest in kind of the peripheral stuff around the Toho community, or at least the Toho game designs and characters and the story and all that stuff.
Okay, yeah, Toho is something that I definitely want to at least try. Here, I'm not sure I understand it by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely want to try it. As far as my answer, I would have to say Kingdom Grand Prix. I tried this, and everyone was praising how well they love this. And I was trying, and I'm like, I just couldn't get into it. And then I looked up online going, what, am I missing something? And sure enough, I was playing it wrong. So I'm going to give it another chance and go back to it. But I was playing it more like a traditional shooter instead of playing it more like a racer. And I was always getting last place going, what am I doing? This is no fun. But for me, it was just not me or at least I believe right now, not grasping the game's mechanics very well. We'll find out.
Yeah, I can go with you on that. When I first started dabbling in emulation way back, kind of in the early days of MAME, and Shippu Mahou Daisakusen was first emulated, I kind of played around with it a little bit because, again, on the shmups.com site, I'm not sure if it was even shmups.com at that point, but it was the website that was that's associated with the Shmups forum. And I know there was a lot of high praise for the game on the forum, and I think somebody did a review of it based on probably the Saturn version. And I messed around with it, and I knew that it had that racing mechanic in it, but I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. And so I never really went back to it. So yeah, that's one of those games that I would like to go back to at some point and give it some serious time. But unfortunately, I think the Saturn version is the only port it ever got, and I haven't priced it lately, but I suspect it's not cheap.
Well, the Saturn version, last time I checked, and this was, just what I can pull off the top of my head here, I think it was like between 60 and 70, which isn't terribly high considering what most STGs go for, but it's high enough that it's going to give people pause.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Well, then maybe next year. We'll take a look.
Yeah.
So, if you don't mind, let's start us off with Strikers 1945 and Psycho.
Yeah. So Strikers 1945-2 was developed and published by Psycho. They started out in 1992 and were made up of some former employees of Visco Systems, in particular part of the team that worked on the first Aero Fighters or Sonic Wings game. And so that's why you see a lot of similarities between Aero Fighters and the early Psycho games in terms of their design and kind of how they flow.
I would have to say that the design resemblance is very well shown within the first Strikers 1945. 2 is sort of its own game, which we'll get into, but the first one you're like, wow, is this did someone make Aero Fighters 4 and they just forgot it and changed the name? Right.
And you get that as well in Gunbird, the very first Gunbird game, and also Tengai. And so Psycho, of course, is well known for their shooting games, and that was kind of the dominant genre that they focused on. Well, that and adult mahjong games. They had multiple series during their run. The Tengai or Sengoku series, which was kind of 3 different games. It consisted of 1 vertical shmup and 2 side-scrollers, one of which technically came out after Psycho was defunct, which was Sengoku Canon on the PSP. There's the Striker series, which of course is Strikers 1945 1 through 3, and then Strikers 1999, and Strikers 1945 Plus, which came out on the Neo Geo hardware, and kind of turned the otherwise Tate game into what you might call a Yokovert or a vertizontal type of game, where it's a vertical scrolling, but it uses the horizontal aspect ratio. And then also the Gunbird series, which is, of course, Gunbird 1 and 2, and you might peripherally count Gunbarish Psycho shoot-em-ups are well renowned for their fast bullets, sizable hitboxes, and bullet swarms that border on the bullet hell style without quite reaching that level. You have bosses that'll shoot out large waves of bullets that they're not so dense that you're struggling to weave between them, but because your ship has a larger hitbox, it makes it feel a little bit more like that. And of course, with fast bullets, that ups the excitement and also the panic factor. In 2002, Psycho was acquired by Xnauts. They've been using the name, but then other development teams apparently developed games under the Psycho name, or the Psycho name was put on their games. So the aforementioned Sengoku Cannon and then Strikers 1945 Plus were both published as Psycho games, but they weren't actually developed by the Psycho team who'd handled those franchises previously. Psycho did collaborate with Capcom on a couple occasions. The Dreamcast version of Gunbird 2 notably featured the Darkstalkers character Morrigan as a playable character, and so that was kind of a bonus for owning the Dreamcast version. And then also the game Cannon Spike, known as Gunspike in Japan, has several playable Capcom characters featured in it, such as Mega Man, Cammy from the Street Fighter series, and Arthur from the Ghosts and Ghouls or Makimura series. Most of the Psycho shoot-'em-up library has now been republished in digital form on the Nintendo Switch over the last year or so from publisher Zero Div. The exceptions to that would be Zero Gunner, which has never seen a console release, and technically Zero Gunner 2, because the publisher claims that the source code has been lost. What they did instead is they created Zero Gunner 2 Minus, which essentially was them rebuilding the game from the ground up for the Switch release. And so there are differences between the original Zero Gunner 2 arcade and Dreamcast releases and what we got on the Switch because of that situation. Arc System Works has published 3 physical volumes in the Asia region, each having 4 games on it. And so those digital releases that we've been seeing on the eShop have a physical form there. And then there's a Japanese versions, the Asia releases have English language support. And then there's a separate 2-volume Japan region physical release that is, from what I understand, supposed to come with some additional materials like some poster replicas and art materials and things like that.
Yeah, the first one of that just came out last month. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it was a couple weeks ago, right?
I'm not sure 100%.
Oh, okay. The first volume came out pretty recently as of this recording on there, and the second one's due out, I believe, in a couple weeks on there. The initial 3 volumes were published by Play Asia, or came out via Play Asia, and then these 2 are Japanese only. As you mentioned, they come out with stuff like bezel or marquee sticker sheets and stuff they will put on top of the cabinet to give them instructions on how to play the game.
Yes, yeah. And so Zero Div and City Connection, who now owns Zero Div and is, I guess, the current IP owner, they've announced development of Strikers 2020, a new entry in the series that is planned for release both in the arcade and multi-platform. And from what I understand, they are targeting a release next year. So it'll be interesting to see if they can pull that off and get that done. And then also what that's going to look like. Whether it'll use modern, sort of current planes in similar fashion to what Strikers 3 did, or if they'll go a different direction and make it futuristic. So that'll be interesting to see. And taken from Wikipedia here, the story for the game is continuing where the last game ended. The forces of CANY, or Canny, have been demolished by the Strikers. However, a faction known as the FGR now has the canny technology and plans to initiate global warfare with massive mecha technology. Once again, the Strikers are called into action to save the world. And essentially, it's like a post-World War II alternate reality kind of thing where after World War II, we're all friends, and so so you essentially have all these different fighter planes from different countries who are involved in World War II fighting alongside one another to take down these sort of terrorist organizations.
Yeah, and the terrorist organization of the first game, I forget what the story is, but they were fighting to militarize the world or something like that. And this time it's pretty much, hey, we're going to go fight some aliens and blow up some aliens.
It's kind of like that, yeah. So it's ludicrous, but...
Hey, it's not spaceships coming from the moon, right? In the era of great chaos.
Exactly. I mean, it's an interesting kind of side story in the same way that you think of, some of the kind of steampunk stuff that you see, like Steel Empire or different things where it's sort of an alternate reality. What if we had gone this direction technology-wise? And so it's kind of interesting to think about, but yeah, like most shoot-'em-up plots, it's pretty flimsy.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much romanticized stuff. It's like the stuff that you see, Sky Kid in the world of, well, Sky Kid is an NES game, but or Sky Captain in the world of tomorrow, and this type of fiction that you see with Crimson Skies that came out by Microsoft on there, where you had sky pirates battling it out with these fictional propeller planes. It's the same reason that all the serials from the 1930s work so well, and then we saw them again with Indiana Jones, that sort of sense of adventure and romanticism with that era of technology that works so well. And
sure.
it's perfect for video games and this type of stuff, where everybody is a friend, and we've got this special task force, global task force, not quite Rainbow Six level, but we've got this special task force called Strikers, and they're going to go save the world.
Yeah, well, and that kind of transitions nicely into talking about kind of the meat of what the attraction for the game is, because one of the cool things about the game is that it uses a number of actual aircraft that are from kind of that World War II era. And so, there are 6 different planes you could choose from. And yeah, they're all based on aircraft that were either used during World War II or were developed around that time. There's a couple of planes that were sort of experimental or prototype craft that never actually saw combat. But it's interesting to think about those planes, had they been fully developed and actually produced, what would that have been like to utilize those planes in this kind of scenario? And so this game kind of posits that.
Yeah, I think it does a really good job of pulling in experimental or even stuff that was on the drawing board, and puts in and goes, hey, what if we attach some rockets and we gave it this and we made it go pew pew? It definitely draws upon the imagination, and as previously mentioned, the romanticism with that era of the propeller or the propeller planes.
Right, because World War II essentially was basically the last gasp of propeller planes in terms of being used for major military offenses. After that, everything started to move toward jet engine technology.
Yeah, no more pancakes. Well, speaking of, we have the let's start off by taking a look at the roster on there. We have the P-38 Lightning, not to be confused with Super Ace. It's blue, not green, so it's not copyright infringement. All right, so the P-38 Lightning comes with a strong forward attack that is focused directly in front of the plane. Its secondary weapon, and the secondary weapons are the weapons that you use by holding down the shot button, are homing missiles that fire automatically once at least one power-up is obtained. And we'll get into how power-ups are obtained in some of the mechanics in a little bit further. We have the bomb attack, which is a Mustang attack formation. If I remember correctly, it does sort of the 1943 loop on there as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you're right.
1943, the Loop Master. The chart. That's probably about. Was it 1943 that? No, 1943 did the Lightning. 1942 was the one that flipped around.
Well,
Sorry, I had
they
those
all
backwards.
flipped around. Actually, they all flipped around.
Oh, okay.
When you use that loop deal, instead of a bomb, there was that loop maneuver. So even 1942 had that.
That brings up PTSD. No, let's keep moving on here. So with the charge attack, with the bomb attack, we have the Mustang attack formation, which does the loop, and with the charge attack, we have frame Type 2 missiles level 1 and 2, and 1-ton bomb at level 3. I never did get to try the 1-ton bomb at level 3, but I definitely did see the Type 2 missiles. There, the P-38 Lightning is piloted by Cindy Volton, as was the same pilot in the first game. I sort of wonder on here if, as such as the Aerofighter's legacy, why they didn't lean maybe a little bit more into that, and then put in a picture of the pilot, because it would have been funny as all heck to see you see a dolphin piloting the Spitfire or something like that. If you're already fighting aliens with propeller planes, and this is sort of romanticized fiction on here, why not go all the way?
Yeah, I don't know. They I guess they decided not to ape their previous work too much.
And maybe it was too far. Somebody goes, that dolphin flying the plane, that's a little too far. Let's dial it back. Anyways, the P-38 Lightning was a product of the Lockheed Corporation and was integral in numerous campaigns during World War II, often used as a bomber or long-range escort fighter. It wasn't nimble enough to be useful for dogfighting, but was useful enough in multiple other ways, and was the only plane to be manufactured during the entirety of the United States participation during World War II. It has a very iconic look. Everybody knows what the P-38 looks like. Anyone who's played 1942, surely, but yeah, it's one of those that everybody's going to look at and go, oh yeah, I know exactly what this is. Yeah. Now, several iterations. Yes.
Oh, I was going to say, just to quickly dovetail on something you said earlier on the 1-ton bomb, I did get that up to level 3 a few times when I was using that ship, and it's an awesome weapon. You basically drop a large bomb on the enemy, and then it creates a field effect with this really long explosion that stops bullets and causes damage.
Oh, nice. Anytime you can have a weapon that bullet cancels, that is extremely helpful, especially when you get to the mid-size enemies or with the bosses on there, because they give that sort of quasi or Danmaku light spread that, as we talked about earlier with Psycho games, go by really quick. And so I'm going to have to try that out, because that would help make this plane a little bit more of a viable option for me.
Yeah.
So, several iterations of P-38 were created during the course of the war, with many subtle improvements made to the craft during the way. A handful of later P-38L variant were special painted and outfitted to make them capable of nighttime incursions, and were dubbed Night Lightning fighters. Well, that's a tongue twister, but I like it. There. All right. We're moving on to the second selectable plane, and this is the one that is most memorable on the series. I mean, the P-38 is something that everyone's seen, but it has appeared again with the 19XX series. But this, of course, we are referring to your favorite of mine, the F-5U Flying Pancake.
That's right.
Now this pancake is armed with a forward cannon and a slight outward spread as it's powered up. It says forward cannon on here, but it's more like a laser shot.
Sure.
If anything in this game is going to go pew pew, it's definitely the shot from the flying pancake. The secondary weapon is a homing laser that increases in number as you collect power-up icons. It's sort of funny to see this thing that almost looks like a manta ray just flying through the sky, and you see these little lasers coming out of it in all different directions as it's powered up. This, of course, was the one that I went to first when I started the game. Is this the same thing for you?
Yeah.
Did you...
Yeah, this was, when I first played the game, this was the ship that I went toward immediately because I thought it looked cool, and as soon as I saw the homing lasers, I was like, yep, I gotta have homing lasers.
Can't disagree with that. All right, the bomb attack for the Flying Pancake is the XB-35 Buster Formation. They're large B-2 bomber-like planes that come through and pretty much block any of the shots on there. Most of the time, when you're going to be dealing with the bomb attacks on there, it's going to be to mitigate the the bullet spread that the bosses are dropping. At least that's what I use the bombs for. I know we'll get a little bit more of that further down the line with the mechanics, but I'm assuming that you were doing the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. There were certain bosses that had bullet spreads that I found to be quite difficult to dodge through or around, and so I would try to time the bomb attack so that right when they were getting ready to do that, or as they were starting to do that, I was activating the bomb to ward off those bullets and then give myself a few seconds of respite to be able to kind of pelt them with a charge weapon or something.
Definitely. And speaking of charged weapons, the charge attack for the Flying Pancake is the Buster Laser. Level 1 is a single laser beam that fires straight ahead. Level 2 is a dual beam on either side of the plane, and Level 3 is a large beam that deflects enemy fire and lasts a long time. Definitely have fun with this thing.
Very impressive laser.
Yeah, the laser is great for... a lot of the bosses on here, places we're going to be going, a lot of it is middle-based. So I should say central-based on here. So being able to just take this large laser and just fire it directly ahead for, well, quote-unquote massive damage really, really helps when you're using the Flying Pancakes. Did you... you sound like you were impressed by it.
Oh, yeah. The level 3 Flying Pancake charge laser is where it's at in terms of sub-weapons. It's really a good option for a charge weapon, and it's one of the primary reasons to use that plane. The XF-5U was based on an earlier prototype. The Flying Pancake is based on a real experimental aircraft, the Vought XF-5U, dubbed the Flying Flapjack. You got to keep the naming in line here. The XF-5U was based upon an earlier prototype known as the V-173. It was designed to operate at a high top speed but allow for low altitude flying, as well as low takeoff and landing speeds. No XF-5U-1 craft were ever flown in combat, let alone in real test flights, and only 2 prototypes were ever produced.
By the time the plane would have been ready for practical use, the U.S. Air Force had already begun to move away from propeller planes to jet engines, so it was deemed no longer practical. But, it would have been neat to see like one of these. I know that they built a couple. It would have been neat to maybe see one of these hanging up at the Smithsonian or something. It would definitely be cool to see in real life.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see how something like that would actually work from a practical standpoint in terms of, watching it in flight and seeing how it maneuvers and so forth.
Definitely. The Flying Pancake was introduced to the series with this game, Strikers 1945-2, and as I say, it's definitely one that's going to garner the most attention from anyone who starts the game. Because its name as aesthetic is totally different than anything that you're going to see in any lineup.
Right. It's pretty iconic, and I think, like you say, it's so recognizable, and it's one of the things that even people who aren't fans of the Striker series or only casually know of it probably have heard of the Flying Pancake.
If you haven't, try it out. All right, moving on, we have the Focke-Wulf, also known as the TA-152. It has a strong forward shot with no spread. Its secondary weapon is a giant rocket missile. Fires after at least one power-up is obtained, and more missiles fired with subsequent pickups. Its bomb is a giant A9 or A10 rocket. It plows through enemies and blocks enemy fire. Now, remember correctly, the rocket never explodes. It just it's like a bull on a mission to just go plow straight ahead, or like a rampaging semi.
Yeah, it just sort of spins around on the screen as it moves from bottom to top, and blocks bullets, and then deals damage or takes out enemies along the way.
Its charged weapon is a plasma mine. Level 1 is a small mine, moves quickly but blocks enemy fire. Level 2 is a larger mine, moves a little bit slower. And level 3 is a large mine, moves very slow, blocks enemy fire for a large radius. This was the charged weapon. It didn't do a lot for me on here. I definitely like some of the other options on here. It's cool, and it does enough to differentiate. It's like a fighting game character who has this mechanic where, like, okay, this can do a lot, but it's a very hard move to pull off. It's not like your usual fireball or quarter circle move within a fighting game. This is sort of like getting more used to Dawson play for you Street Fighter 2 play. It requires some work and some expertise in order to make really good use of it. It's not something that's pick up and play to me. Did you experiment with this that much?
I did, and it's interesting that you mentioned fighting games, because the thing that I think of with the Focke-Wulf is that essentially the charge weapon, when it creates this plasma mine, is that you can orient your ship on top of it and move up the screen along with it. So as it's moving up, it can be constantly blocking bullets from your position. And so it's almost like the shmup equivalent of turtling in a fighting game.
Huh. Or a shield within Gradius. Okay.
Yeah, you're blocking the enemy fire during that time, but you're able to deal damage and kind of move up the screen while you're doing that. And so, unlike a shield where you get you get the opportunity to possibly not die when you take a hit or two, it allows you to, if you do it right, follow that plasma mine all the way up the screen and not take any damage or not lose any lives, as long as you're not running into enemies, and you're able to take you fire a lot of your main cannon while that's happening. But as you said, it requires some technique and kind of learning how to use it and when to best make use of that. I don't think the level 1 is very useful. Most of the charge weapons are pretty useful at level 1, And so the idea is to kind of spam that, but unless you can stay perfectly within the radius of that mine, it's not all that useful at level 1 because the mine plasma radius is pretty small, and so because of the large hitbox of the planes, you really need to stay pretty tightly within that radius. And so it really becomes useful at level 2, but even more so at level 3 because it moves so slowly up the screen, and it allows you to block enemy fire for a really long time. So for boss fights especially, when you would normally use a charge weapon to handle that, if you go to the bottom of the screen and charge up a level 3 plasma mine, and then just sort of inch up the screen as it's going, instead of relying on a charge weapon, you have the ability to essentially just pelt that boss with regular fire and have effectively immunity from their bullets and attacks.
Yeah, you almost have to with this plane. I think about because this is one of the slowest moving planes in the lineup. The Flying Pancake's very fast, and the P-38 has pretty good speed. But its shots are very powerful, but it is slow. So I get where they got to give you the trade-off for the maneuverability. Otherwise, you're just going to be, as we call it within Gradius on here, with 0 speed-ups rowing across the stars.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. The TA-152 was an iteration of an earlier FW-190 plane. The Focke-Wulf, pronounced Focke-Wulf, was a German aerospace company named partially after founder Heinrich Focke that operated from 1923 to 1964. The TA-152 was developed specifically for the German Luftwaffe, but were only in service starting January 1945, so they didn't participate in World War II very long before it was over. Designed to be a higher altitude flyer, similar to the Boeing B-17. I'm sure you can probably do a B-17 bomber better than me.
B-17 bomber.
I'll take
talking
it.
About the German Luftwaffe? For a second there, I almost thought you were going to say a Luftwaffle. And I was thinking, flying pancakes? German Luftwaffles? What are we talking about, schnapps or breakfast?
Somebody's hungry. Oh, boy. I'm sure bacon's going to enter the conversation at some point, too.
Bacon.
Oh, indeed. All right. Well, unfortunately, we don't have bacon after this. We have the Ki-84 Hayate. And the Hayate has a main cannon for its strong forward... has a main cannon as its main shot with a strong forward fire and with the light spread as it gets powered up. Its secondary weapon, and I'm known to mispronounce this, is a Siusi? Siusui, okay. Super Rush, homing beacons that target enemies and fire at them until destroyed. Now the bomb, and again, here we go, mispronounce this, I'm sure. Fugaku?
Yeah, Fugaku.
Fugaku, okay. Fugaku covering fire. It's a large Japanese long-range bomber long-range bomber attack. And the charge attack is a fixed Suishu. Super Rush sets up a group of drones to attack in a specific location for an extended period. It was manufactured by the Nakajima Aircraft Company at the Hayate, and nicknamed Frank by Allied forces, was a formidable plane, and over 3,500 of them were produced during the latter portion of World War II. The Ki-84 is a single-engine plane that could handle multiple machine guns and could fly at high altitudes, allowing it to reach even some Allied bombers. The Hayate I played with a little bit on here, but it just didn't really suit my playstyle. Did you end up using this ship very much, or this plane?
Yeah, actually, early on, I kind of developed it as one of the favorites because even though it wasn't quite as quick as the homing lasers on the Flying Pancake, the fact that its weapon did seek out targets to destroy made it a good ship to use. Plus, then, its charge weapon, because you could charge it up and then let the drones go and sit in place and attack an area or a target while you're flying around attacking other targets. Made it a pretty good choice, I thought. It was a little slow, but overall I had reasonable success with it.
Yeah, this is the one that I saw most used on long plays online. When I looked through on there, everyone's using the Hayate because it kept in Strikers 1945, the original game. The subshots for each plane was options on there, and I'm thankful that they changed it up for this and gave each plane its own sort of distinct personalities. But this is a holdover from the first Strikers 1945 game, and it's as far as I remember, it's the only one that came with the subshot being the options themselves. And I'm not talking about the homing ones, but I'm talking about the ones where you get for destroying the popcorn enemies and the secondary weapon. I know that the lightning's the other. The lightning was the other one that's all over, but that one has more of a little miniature, or the P-38 has the miniature planes, the heat-seeking miniature planes that come out of there. It doesn't have the options.
Right. Yeah, but I think and two, the charge weapon, those drones at level 3 is fairly devastating, and it lasts a long time, so you can really pelt away at a boss and do a fair amount of damage.
All right, moving on, we have the J7W Shinden. Its primary fire is straight ahead only, but very rapid fire when powered up. Its secondary weapon is a heat missile that attaches to an enemy and damages it over time as it passes through. The bomb is a Ryusei Kai sweep bomber, is a role of Aichi B7A Ryusei fighters, blocks enemies' fire and fires machine guns at oncoming enemies. The charge shot is a samurai sword type 9-8, especially a phantom version of the Shinden. Much like the heat missiles, it passes through enemies as it damages them. It will clear bullets in its path. In level 1 and 2 create a relatively small phantom, but at level 3 covers nearly half the screen. The Shinden is one that I experienced because of its rapid fire and its high speed of movement. I use this one a lot for experimentation. Trying it there. It's very rapid firing, but its shots, like the Flying Pancake, its shots aren't very powerful. So if you're at level 1, you're gonna have a tough time.
Yes, especially because at level 1, it's just a single shot coming out of the center of the plane, out of the nose, whereas a lot of the planes, they at least have a double shot. And so, much like, say, 1942, which we covered previously, the double shot at least covers a slightly wider area of effect. And so as you're shooting forward, you may be able to clip enemies with one side or the other a little bit better. Whereas with the Shinden, it's literally, they have to be, you got to be dead on accurate with the primary fire until you power up. But I did enjoy the heat missiles, and I found them to be relatively useful. Similar to the charge drones on the Hayate, you can maneuver the plane to inline with an enemy, fire off a small batch of the heat missiles, and then move on to, say, another medium-sized enemy or what have you. And let those heat missiles kind of go up and damage that enemy. And even if they don't take it out, a lot of times you'd find that the medium-sized planes or tanks or enemies would be flashing red, meaning that they were almost ready to die. And so you could be doing damage to them even when you're not right in front of them. And then you can kind of swing back over and score the final blow on them. And so there was some utility with that. I experimented with the Shinden somewhat, but ultimately, I did not find it to be a plane that was easy enough to use and strong enough for me to really be good for my playstyle.
Yeah, I suppose previously mentioned on there, you have to have it constantly powered up. It's almost like it sort of suffers from Gradius syndrome with this type of playstyle for there. It's great when you're going, but if you get hit once, well, you might want to look at restarting.
Oh, yeah.
Thankfully, within these, most of the levels are going to be about 3 to 5 minutes each, so it's not too bad in a game like this.
Right.
So, this plane is piloted by Ain, and due to its first appearance in Samurai Aces, a crossover link between the Samurai Tengai series and the Striker series. Much like the VF5U, the J7W Shinden, Japanese for Magnificent Lightning, never got past the prototype stage. It was intended for short-range missions and was to have multiple 30mm cannons at the front of the craft. It's distinguished by wings at the rear of the plane rather than the front or the middle, and the propeller engine was at the rear as well. It definitely had, like the Flying Pancake, has an iconic design.
Yeah, it has a very distinctive look, and it's also interesting because when you look at photographs of the prototype that they built, it almost looks shorter than the version that appears in the game. And so I don't know if that was a design choice in the game to change it up a little bit and make it look a little sleeker, or what the reason was for that. But yeah, the pictures, the photos that I saw of the actual Shinden prototype made it look shorter than what you would think based on how it looks in the game.
Moving on to another fan favorite here, we have the DH-98 Mosquito. Its main weapon is strong forward fire with light spread. Its secondary weapon is a consecutive rocket missile, which quickly fires powerful forward missiles out after the first power-up. The bomb is the Mosquito Attackers, a row of mosquito jets to block enemy fire and bomb targets. The charged weapon is a Royal Napalm, which creates a column of exploding napalm that chain reacts through the top of the screen. The Halavand DH-98 Mosquito was a unique British plane, and its frame and body were mostly wood, making it ideal for slipping past radar detection. Yeah, this is a plane that you definitely did not want to get shot at, and it was wasn't it balsa wood, if I remember correctly?
It's made out of. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the article that I read specified that.
Okay. I could just be pulling this off the top of my head, but either way, it was meant to be very light, strike very, very fast, burn things, and then get out.
Yeah.
Definitely not to be confused with the Mosquito of our previous episode either. It was manufactured and in use by the British RAF from 1940 to 1950 by the de Havilland Aircraft Company. Several variants of the craft exist, built for different reasons. Over 1,000 of them were built by de Havilland's Canadian branch, as well as some who were constructed in Australia. This plane is definitely got a unique play style on there. I got used to the way that the plane handles the shots and stuff, but I didn't get quite used to the sub weapon there. I think that you have a little bit of a better grasp on how the sub weapon works for this plane.
Yeah, I took to the Mosquito quite a bit toward the end of the month because I really like, in similar fashion to the Shinden with the heat missile, the rocket missiles that the Mosquito fires out. You can kind of position your Mosquito parallel to or right underneath a larger plane, let it fire off a volley of these missiles, and then move away and strike at other targets. And it's going to be damaging that target up ahead to where you fire those missiles off. And so you can kind of do that in these sort of surgical strikes of move around to where a medium-sized enemy or turret or tank or something is going to be, let it fire a volley of missiles and then quickly move somewhere else and have it fire another volley, and just kind of keep doing that to utilize those missiles. And then, of course, unlike the Shinden, since the Mosquito has a little bit of a light spread as you're powering up, you're covering more ground, so you're able to take out more popcorn enemies more quickly and efficiently that way. And so even though it's not the fastest plane out there, I felt like the spread and the missiles really helped to compensate for that.
All right. Speaking of spread and missiles and sub-weapons, let's talk about how we actually play the game.
Yeah. So, obviously, like most shoot-'em-ups, you've got standard 8-way movement with a joystick on the original arcade cabinet, and, of course, with a D-pad or joystick or whatever your preferred control method is on various console versions. The game has 2 action buttons, your standard fire button and then your bomb or, attack wave or vector type of button. We call it the bomb button because that's kind of become the standard, but realistically it's, each one of the craft each one of these planes as we've described has, its bomb attack essentially is a squadron or large plane kind of a thing where it comes in and blocks enemy fire and deals some damage to enemies. And so your fire button doubles as your secondary attack button by holding it down in order to charge that up. One of the nice things about the game is that in order to get a rapid fire rate, you don't have to sit there and tap it super fast. By pressing the button down and holding it very briefly, it'll shoot out several shots and a volley of whatever your sub-weapon is. And so you can kind of just tap it methodically, but not have to break your fingers tapping super rapidly in order to get the same effect. And so it's kind of nice to be able to tap lift, tap lift, tap lift, tap lift, instead of tap, 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 tap kind of a thing. So that was a nice, I guess you could say, feature of Psikyo games in general, because most of their games follow that tactic. But in Strikers 1945 too, we talked about the charge weapon. And so how that works is, as you're destroying enemies, there's a meter at the bottom of the screen that fills up. You'll notice that when you first start playing, there's the meter there, it's empty, and there's kind of a red X that's over it. Once you see the number 1, that means that you've activated level 1 of the charge weapon. And so then you can hold down the fire button for a couple of seconds or whatever it is, and then release that to execute that charge attack. You can, of course, continue to destroy enemies and get it up to level 2, and then all of the charge weapons max out at level 3. And as we kind of have mentioned with a couple of the planes there, all of the level 3 attacks are pretty effective and are definitely worth utilizing during the course of your playthrough. If you're playing well and you're destroying all the enemies that come your way, generally speaking, you will have the ability to build up your meter to level 3 either prior to or during the boss fight. And so you'll be able to reach that and be able to then execute that level 3 charge attack against the boss, which can be very effective and very helpful. But one of the things that Vic Viper said to me when he was watching me on stream, and a couple of other people who had played Strikers quite a bit echoed this as well, is that one of the good tactics during the game is that because your level 1 weapon charges up so quickly by destroying enemies, that you can kind of spam that. And so it's a useful thing to be able to utilize that more frequently. I kind of reached a point where I was more so charging up to level 3 and then utilizing those against the boss because I found that to be very effective. But I also did the other where I just kind of spammed the charge attack during the course of the level. And that also helps as well in order to take out enemies faster and especially eliminating some of the more problem enemies that, shoot bullet spreads or target you and fire bullets at you.
It's definitely impressive that this game gives you enough freedom to break from pathing. With the Danmaku games, you're going to have pathing on here. You're like, okay, I need to do this in order to get max out the points. There's a set path that you're almost like those little marble games where you're rolling it around and you're always going to be going a certain way. You got to tilt it just right. It's like trying to follow and do a perfect path every time. With this game, and I believe it, and I may misquote this on here, but I believe it was Zoido who mentioned this, that this game gives you freedom to break free from the pathing and to do a little bit of experimentation.
Yeah, it really does. Based on whether you're saving up your charge weapon or spamming it a lot, it can really, really change pretty dynamically how you play.
And a lot of the games too, you're looking at. We got the one too where you use your you build up use your popcorn enemies to build up your whatever bar you're looking to build up, and then you use the breaker or your bomb or whatever you have on the boss. But this had sort of a different dynamic with the fact that the bombs aren't just there to save you from bullet patterns or to cancel out from there. You have the charge shot, which can also do, depending upon the plane, do the same thing. It adds a third element into there, which does a lot for the variety.
Yeah.
And really, in my opinion, helps out with the gameplay on it and creates its own thing. Where Crimson, like take for example Crimson Clover on there, you're looking at, you're going to be doing one of two things, right? You're going to be dealing with the popcorn enemies, or you're going to be breaking.
True.
You're going to be alternating between those two things in order to boost up your score. As you mentioned here, you're like, okay, well, it's a viable strategy to always be spamming the level 1 charged attack, or maybe I hold on to it and then I spam that, and then I can bomb the boss. That type of variety is something that, to me, will keep me coming back and playing the game. Not to mention, the levels on this game are very bite-sized, at being about 3 to 5 levels, 3 to 5 minutes each. So it's very approachable, but yet has more of a depth than you'd normally expect out of a shooter. It falls some, and as we talked about before, it's not quite a Danmaku, but it's not quite a traditional shooter. It rides the line in between, and it does a very good job of it.
Yeah. Now, generally speaking, extends are earned at 600,000 points. Alternatively, when you're choosing a difficulty level at the option screen, at least in the console versions, you can set the extend value to 800,000. I don't know why you'd ever want to do that, but it is an option. I don't know if that's 600,000 points, if that's every 600,000 points you earn an extend, or if it's only at 600,000. Because I think I only got to above 100 or above 1.2 million points once or twice, or maybe only once. So I don't remember for sure if it's every 600,000 points or if it's just once at 600,000. But I suspect it's every 600,000. And there are 7 different difficulty levels in the game. They are as follows. Difficulty 1 is known as Monkey. Difficulty 2 is known as Child. Difficulty 3 is Very Easy. Level 4 is Easy. Level 5 is Normal, and that is the default. Level 6 is Hard. And Level 7 is Very Hard. And so as I mentioned there, the default difficulty is 5. The game allows you to play through all stages in the first loop, but if you want to access the harder second loop, that doesn't open up unless you're playing on normal or higher.
I wonder how they play tested this on there. It's like, let's figure out here. How do you play test it's not the difficulty level of Monkey on there. I just get them a picture of them and actually just, all right, go to the zoo, grab a monkey, get them to play this game. If they can beat it, we're all good.
Well, I'm sure you've heard the expression that you put a whole bunch of monkeys in a room with pencils and paper, and eventually you'll get Shakespeare. Well, put a bunch of monkeys in a room with Sega Saturns and PlayStations and copies of this game, and eventually one of them will beat Strikers 1945 too.
Eventually, yes. It just proves one of those. You get the weird, sort of almost Far-Side-ish picture in your mind here of playtesting with monkeys. So.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, and in a way, it's almost like Psycho is trolling the fan base. Are you playing on Monkey because you just want to have an easy time? Or is it because you're terrible at the game, and so they're kind of taunting you a little bit, saying, haha, you suck?
These days, that would be... that might be part of the extra DLC. You want easy mode? Well, you pay us on here, DLC. We'll turn it on for you. It comes in part of this loot box you got to deal with first.
Yeah. What is it? You cheated yourself and something like that. That meme that was going around.
Oh, jeez. Either that or these days they would do something like you've seen this before with like id Software games were pretty good with this, where you the "Don't Hurt Me, Daddy" for Wolfenstein 3D. Yeah. I just they put a diaper on your plane or something like that. Going through, that type of stuff. That type of humor is something that I expect to see. Maybe that's coming in Strikers 2020.
Well, hey, if Aero Fighters can have a dolphin, Strikers can have a monkey.
Oh, there we go. DLC character. Monkey difficulty, you get to fly the flying monkey. Oh, man. Well, let's get back to normalcy here and about the normal difficulty.
Sure. Well, there are 8 stages in the game, and one of the things that is a staple in a lot of the Psycho games is that the first 4 are always in a random order. And so, taking some information here from the Strikers fandom page, of the first 4 stages, you have the North Atlantic Ocean location, and the boss is the Graf Zeppelin, which is an aircraft carrier in its first form. And then all of these bosses, when you destroy the first form, they all turn into some kind of a mech. Then you have the East China Sea, and the boss is the Siumi Type 0, which is a flying boat that then, of course, turns into a mech when you destroy the lower portion of it. You fly over France, and I didn't even put it in the outline because I wasn't even going to attempt to pronounce the area that you're flying over. But the boss is the Iron Casket, which is sort of a large airship. And then you also fly over the Grand Canyon.
How would you like to... Sorry, I just wondering, how would you like to fly... So what are we going to be flying? Well, we've got this top secret military ship. It can do a lot. I mean, it's very powerful. Well, what's it called? The Iron Casket. That's like, that's like going, oh wow, that's going to inspire confidence in me here. This thing's not going to run into trouble.
Yeah. The
Iron Casket on there. It's why don't they just name it this ship that turns into mech? It's called the Titanic 2. Nothing can go wrong.
Oh yes. And then in one of the missions, you fly over the Grand Canyon, and the boss is known as Goliath, which is sort of like Goliath but without the O. Anyway, it's an armored train that, of course, then turns into a mech once you've blown up the front of the train. Then from stage 5 on, they're all the same. And so stage 5, you're flying over the Kalahari Desert in Namibia, and you're taking on the boss that's known as Rommel, which is sort of a turret tank fortress thing. And yes, the name is inspired by, I can't remember exactly, it's a German general or...
Desert Fox.
What's that?
Desert Fox, North African. Desert Fox, North African campaign.
Yes.
They're Rommel, yes, the German general, I believe it was general, but don't quote me on that part.
Yeah, I think you're right. Stage 6 is in Brazil, then it is over the Madeira Dam. The boss is called the Cross Sinker, which is a large submarine. Then in stage 7, you're in Brazil. You're still in Brazil, and you're at the Cani industrial site. The boss is known as Blockade, and it is a giant claw tank. And then stage 8 is actually at FG.
Wait, did you just say giant enemy crabs?
Giant claw tank.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said giant enemy crab. Sorry.
Nope. No crabs. And Stage 8 is the FGR headquarters, and the boss is actually FGR, and it has 3 different forms. You have the mechanical tentacle alien, the mechanical insectoid alien, and then you have the base's core that you fight there at the end.
And none of them transform into a mech.
Those do not. Yeah, that's the only boss that does not have a mech form throughout the game. One thing to note about the game is the rank system. And so shout out to Kiken from the Shmups forums for this. I'm quoting him here. It says, all Psycho Shmups use a rank system. Once fully powered up, the rank will increase. To decrease the rank, run into an enemy or two to power down. This will cause various bullet patterns to move slower while dispersing others. And I noted here that that is known as a power down in the game. Those who watched my streams know that I was very frustrated with power downs, but knowing this information, perhaps I shouldn't have been, because the times when I powered down may have been times that saved my bacon with my flying pancake, because I probably ranked down and had less to deal with. So that's an interesting point there.
If you throw in a balanced breakfast joke in here, we're done.
No, but I could say something about OJ flying the flying pancake.
Yes, you could. This breakfast humor.
As I mentioned before, if you're playing on normal or above, you have access to the second loop if you're inhuman enough to be able to defeat the first loop. But anything below normal difficulty, and you only get to play through the first loop. And so stage 1 through 8 on, kind of the standard game difficulty.
All right, well, let's take a look at the scoring on here. The max bomb stock is 9, with each bomb collected after that is worth 10,000 points.
Yes, so...
Occasionally throughout the stages... Yes, sir.
Well, I was going to say, so from a strictly scoring perspective, if you're good enough at the game to where you can go without bombing, that's what you want to do, because 10,000 points is quite a large number given where the scores are at in the game. And so, strictly from a scoring perspective, you're encouraged not to bomb, even though the way that a lot of the boss fights and level design is set up, panic bombing or, hitting that button to bring in a squadron of planes is kind of your normal response. In order to really maximize your score, you want to be able to learn the levels, the enemy placements and patterns, and all of that really well, so that you don't have to use that tactic, so you can then bank those and be able to maximize that score. The one thing in conjunction with that is when you die, you lose your bomb stock, and it goes back to the default of 3. So this is only viable when you're in a no-miss situation, or where you're not using up any of your lives.
Yeah, with the bomb in there, it seemed to, at least within this, near the end of the stages, they're at least nice enough to give you one plane that you can shoot down and you'll get an extra bomb.
Yeah.
It's not unforgiving within this, but it's not... They encourage you to bomb with the bullet placements and the fact that they give you a bomb on there, but it's also nice that the levels are short enough that you could get used to the enemy placements and avoid it. It's a little difficult in dealing with bombs because in this type of game, because with Danmaku type games, a bomb is almost sort of like oops, I messed up. I'm going to lose my run. I'm going to lose my multiplier, so I've got to bomb in order to help keep my score going. But with this, I would more say that bombing's a double-edged sword in this game.
Sure.
All right, moving on, we have gold bars. Here, the gold bars appear after defeating some ground-based enemies. The point value you receive for each bar will depend upon its state. You get 200 points right after the gold bar flashes, 500 when it's closer to a flash, and 1,000 points when it's just before a flash. you'll receive 2,000 points if you grab it when it's flashing. With this, I just ended up most of the time grabbing. I was too busy with stuff that was going on screen to try and maximize my point value to make sure everything was flashing. How about you?
Yeah, I attempted to do that a little bit when I first started, but I found that I was concentrating on that too much and dying. So I didn't really do that much. I mostly just went and grabbed them when I saw them. I tried to grab them all if I could, especially if you get a lot of them in a group. Then if you just kind of fly over the group or whatever, typically you'll get a couple of 200s, a couple of 500s, maybe 1,000, and every once in a while you'll luck out and get the 2,000. But yeah, most of the time I just kind of grabbed them so I could get the points, but I didn't really focus on trying to get the maximum points from them because I had a hard time with the timing.
Yeah, and this game, I mean, even though it is score based on here, this isn't as dependent as, say, DuckTales. On here, you're not Scrooge McDuck trying to fill up a money vault on here. You're trying to survive most of this. So it's something that I think is cool that they implemented. It's just something that in practice is not something that I ever bothered with.
Right.
All right, so moving on to scoring for enemies. Here this is provided to us from GameFAQs fact by Warming Blasters. We have 200 points for each standard popcorn enemy, 500 points for a standard ground tank, 2,000 points for a heavy ground turret. And I believe this was pointed out by Ryoto again, that if you get close to the ground turrets, they will not fire.
Yes, Easy Racer mentioned that.
I'm sorry, Easy Racer. There, yeah, it's definitely something that I started implementing to my runs as soon as I noticed on there. I thought that was a neat touch on there. If only they did that in the Gradius series, or especially with Moai heads, that would save many a life of a Vic Viper.
Oh, absolutely.
So we also have 5,000 points for destroying the first form or shield of a boss, and 2,000 points for each power-up after the fourth pickup.
Yeah, and that it kind of introduces from a scoring perspective, a bit of a risk-reward, because obviously if you've got 4 power-ups and you're at the max level, then you're at rank up, so the game is harder. So then when you have those opportunities to pick up power-ups beyond that level, you get that bonus point, but then you have to deal with more difficult stuff. And so there's that push-pull effect of, do I power up all the way and then get the 2,000 points? Or is that not enough to justify always being at the higher rank and having to deal with more bullets, more spread, faster bullets, and all of that?
Yeah, for me, for the most part, it was forego the points and deal with the lower rank. Moving on, let's take a look at the graphics here. The graphics, for me, were a huge improvement over Strikers, the original Strikers 1945. I like the aesthetic of the original game because I'm partial to the Sonic Wing series or the Aero Fighter series. But this, you can tell this is the game where it became its own thing with as we talked about earlier, the diversification of the planes on here. But I would say primarily the explosions are done better. It's easier to identify what things are. The bullets have their own distinctive styles on there. You can tell which one, the small spreads from the larger spreads on there, and with the different hitboxes on there. And the enemy patterns the enemy sprites are unique. They're big, they're colorful, they're full of a lot of frames of animation, it's very well done package, and it's very much an improvement over the first Strikers.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this versus the Aero Fighters Legacy? And do you believe that this game sort of comes into its own, is like the Street Fighter 2 to Strikers 1945 2 is Street Fighter 2 compared to Strikers 1945 as is to the original Fighting Street or Street Fighter?
Yeah, I would say that's a really good analogy. The original Strikers 1945 is a solid shoot-'em-up that effectively takes the Aero Fighters or Sonic Wings formula and iterates upon it ever so slightly, but doesn't do a whole lot to set itself apart from that previous game. It's sort of like a 1.5 version, if you will, of what they did with Aero Fighters. Whereas Strikers 1945 2, they really pushed past that and began to make it its own thing, as you said, by changing up the bombers to these squadrons of planes, and I think there was some of that in the first game, but more emphasis on the charge attack, adding in these experimental planes and really making the game more colorful and more interesting to look at. Yeah, it really does start to see Strikers 1945 move away from the Aero Fighters legacy and into becoming its own unique entity. I really like the animations with the squadron bomb attacks, and I really like how all the charge attacks look in their different versions, their different levels. And yeah, I mean, the game just looks really nice. That's one of the things that struck me when I first played the game, is that it just looks really nice. It's very clean, it's detailed, and everything just looks really good.
Yeah, and I have to bring up the point that with some of the stuff that we've encountered earlier, when you have a militaristic theme, it can be a little hard for things to start looking samey, and that doesn't happen here. Especially looking at some of the bullet patterns that are it could be really easy to have a situation like we had last month with Ghostblade, where you have that stray pink bullet, and you're like, what the heck is this? It just sort of blended in. Or even with, that happens sort of in Einhander, where it's hard to gauge. I didn't have that problem with this.
No.
With Strikers 1945 too.
No, the only time that I had a problem with that is if I missed an enemy bullet being fired out because I got too close to one and they kind of sniped me as I was either destroying them or, that kind of a thing where I got a little too close to an enemy and they shot a bullet out at me, and because the bullets move fast and because I was so close, I didn't really have any time to react. Or occasionally an enemy would fire a bullet as they were approaching me and kind of moving off the screen, and I had destroyed another enemy that might have been relatively close to me, so then they fired that bullet that went maybe through that other enemy's explosion. And so if I didn't see them fire it specifically, I had a lot less time to react to it. But other than that, all the bullets are bright and colorful. They're generally easy to see against the backgrounds. And yeah, generally speaking, if you get hit by a bullet, it's your fault, because the game is designed well enough to give you the tools to see that and identify that before it hits you.
Yeah, and as we previously mentioned there, the bullets, for the most part, aren't something that's going to be a surprise in there. Even with the larger bullets fired out by the bosses, I didn't have problems. I had problems navigating them, sure, as mentioned with Psycho games, where the bullets are going to be coming at you pretty fast no matter what. But I didn't have any problems distinguishing between what I could shoot at or what I could get away with in the game. There, graphically, it makes its the visual language is easy to interpret and understand.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
it's not 1942, and you're playing with. We're trying to play through, and some of that stuff gets through because you're looking at green planes and you're flying over. Remember when we were last year? I think it was November last year when we played 1942. As soon as you get away from the water and you get onto land, how hard it was to detect some of those ships, especially in the airplanes, especially in the NES version, where you have that very limited color palette and everything just sort of started blending in there.
Yes.
It was really easy to miss the shot. This doesn't have that, and I'm, again, very thankful for it. One thing I do want to bring up that I encountered a little bit, and I want to find out if you did as well, is had a little bit of slowdown in the Saturn version. I played the PlayStation version, or the PlayStation 2 version, which is done, I believe it's in 480i because it had the weird borders on it. It was constantly switching resolutions with see in the background. But it was easier for me to play that version than go back to the Saturn version. And I'm not sure how much of that was lag introduced by the FrameMeister that I was using for the Saturn version versus just letting my, 480i is a lot easier for a TV for most TVs to just deinterlace and take in than having to deal with an upscaler. Did you encounter a lot of lag on that?
No, and I didn't really notice the slowdown. Whatever slowdown there is in the Saturn version, either I didn't encounter it because I wasn't playing at a high enough difficulty level to get the number of bullets and or enemies on the screen. I guess with the exception of there's just a tiny little bit of slowdown that you notice during the battleship fight.
That was the one that turned into a mech, right?
The Graf Zeppelin, the aircraft carrier. There's just a scant little bit of slowdown that happens with that fight during the first phase where you've got tons of planes flying on the screen and all the turrets shooting at you. And then during the second phase, when there's a fair amount of bullet spread, you get just the slightest little bit of slowdown. But, I was playing on the Sega Saturn S-Video to my RetroTink, which just line doubles it basically, and then converts that to 480p over HDMI. And so I didn't notice that much. That was probably the one noticeable place that I felt you could tell that there was slowdown. But everywhere else, I didn't really notice it.
I mean, the Saturn version runs pretty well. It wasn't a huge issue, but it was a lot of little minor things. I just found the PlayStation 2 version to be easier for me to navigate.
Sure. Either
version is definitely serviceable.
Absolutely.
Moving on, let's talk about the sound and music. The music, you have written down the notes that the music has an almost MIDI-like sound to it, with a MIDI synthesizer style electric guitar, programmed drum hits, and basic synthesizer sounds. Yeah, it definitely has. It's not a bombastic. Here, it feels very much. I'm trying to think of almost like in some ways a Casio keyboard type quality to it. Is very simplistic, but it definitely does a good job.
One of the things that I've never quite latched on to the music in this game, other than getting a couple of the melodies stuck in my head. Some of that is because of this sort of MIDI-style instrumentation. I'm not a big fan of MIDI instrumentation, or, the old days of Windows computers and early MIDI files. It was kind of neat at first, but for me it kind of wears thin pretty quickly. I love chiptune, even stuff that's a little bit more harsh, like the PSG chip that's in the Master System, or early Atari 2600 and ColecoVision type systems, where the sounds are very bold and sometimes not very tuneful, sort of beeps and so forth. But then I also love FM synthesis and things like that in a lot of later arcade games, and You start to get into some FM synthesis in the 16-bit era, and then, of course, in the 32-bit era, either using different kinds of programmed instrumentations that were a lot more robust sounding. There are some implementations of MIDI that I like, or that I think sound really good and make sense for the context. Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation has kind of a MIDI type of sound to it. But for some reason, that sounds less tinny, and there's a warmth to it that this game doesn't have. This game has that more harsh MIDI kind of sound and feel to it. I can't quite put my finger on it other than to say that I like the music itself well enough that what I would really like to do is to hear someone cover some of the good tracks on here with real instruments based on what they're approximating in the game's original soundtrack. Or I'd like to see, in Strikers 2020, for example, I would love to see them revisit some of the tunes from past Strikers games, but do those in updated either instrument sets that you can do with music to create this stuff, or to actually do live instrumentation and produce that kind of a thing for the game, to take some of these tunes and really make them sound awesome. Yeah, I mean, like I put in the notes here, it's energetic music, and it's definitely better than the first Strikers, but something about it to me just doesn't work 100%.
Yeah, and I think the barrier here is that it works well within the game. It's definitely an improvement of the first game, but you're not going to find yourself humming the tunes outside of the game. It doesn't have that staying power in your mind. Like, if you mention to everybody Super Mario Brothers, and they're going to start humming the tune of the first game, or you talk about The Legend of Zelda and your things, but there's no, or even Gradius. You're going to get the Challenger music there coming. Everyone, there's nothing iconic about the soundtrack. It's very good at keeping you engaged in the game, but it doesn't tilt on the spectrum one way or the other. You're not going to get it memorable, but it's not going to be 1942. Please give me some earplugs. It's squarely at a little bit better than being right in the middle. And I guess the word for it is serviceable. And maybe serviceable is a little bit harsh, but it does a job. But you're not going to be humming these tunes outside, or playing, or you're not going to see remakes or covers of these on YouTube.
Sure, and that's the thing. I would like to, because I'd like to hear what some of these things would sound like if they were done with more full, robust instrumentation that had a bigger sound to it. Because there are a couple of good melodies in some of these songs, but I don't know. Just the way that the instrumentation was done, it didn't grab me.
I hear it. Yeah, it's definitely that if it wasn't MIDI and maybe a little bit more Red Book done with actual instruments, it may have gotten maybe something more memorable for you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when a lot of the Saturn games that have become favorites of mine over the years are games that have Red Book soundtracks. I mean, things like Galactic Attack and Darius Gaiden. Now, of course, those two are both Zuntata soundtracks, so they're going to be legendary anyway. And as far as I'm concerned, that was during their best period. But, even stuff like Virtual On. The Virtual On soundtrack is amazing, and it's Red Book audio, so, you can pop that in the CD player and listen to it. And so stuff like that, a lot of those Saturn games that really stuck with me were games that had those great soundtracks. And a lot of that was just because that format allowed them to do more with the instrumentation. Even if it was Yellow Book audio, where it was a lower quality, but it was still something that they could stream from the disc, that would give it a little bit better sound quality and the ability to do more in terms of instrumentation. Now, of course, I know that this was an arcade game, and so the music is probably what the arcade hardware that they were using was capable of doing. But it's still, I still feel like if it could have had a more robust sound to it, they could have sounded better and maybe stuck out more.
Fair enough. Now that we've given our impressions of the game, let's move on to some of the RF Generation community. We have Zoido here saying, "Gentlemen, expect my participation." Later post, "No progress on normal so far, but I got a monkey clear yesterday. Well, congratulations on the monkey clear. A clear is a clear." Later post, final thoughts, "Oh look, a power-up. Nice, let me just pick this up. Crap."
Yeah, and
your response was, "Yeah, that's going."
Yeah, I quoted his post and I said, laugh out loud, "That's definitely going in the podcast episode."
His response was, "It gets me every time. It's like I learn nothing from playing Psycho games. I somehow don't have the patience. I play every day, but just a few runs and then lose it. I often experience that with Psycho games. Well, I don't think you're alone in that one. I still like them and think they're good shooters. Maybe I'm too nervous." Yeah, it's almost like this game is made to induce panic attacks in people.
It really is that sort of panic thing that that we've mentioned a couple of times. It really does come into play. Easy Racer jumped in and he said, "I'll be on PS1." And then a few posts later he says, "First trip to 1-3 on difficulty 4. I had never played this before, and my initial impressions of it, sometimes you just want to blow stuff up, and this game does a great job of scratching that itch. Lots of fun so far. Hopefully I can make progress." Later in the thread he says, "This game is awesome. It's an adrenaline thrill ride, but I can tell I've gotten better at shmups in the past year in some of the ways I'm tackling the levels here. Love the soundtrack, love the graphics and theming. Love the little details that make it more playable, like only losing power levels if you touch other craft and getting at least one power-up right away after your death." And that's one thing that we didn't note before, is that when you die, usually there will be an enemy squadron that will come down, and you'll usually have opportunities to pick up at least one, if not two, power-ups. He says, "Really only two complaints so far. Flying in the lower left edge of the screen can be difficult because the power meter covers up your ship, and I wish you didn't lose all your bombs when you die. I tried all planes and kept track of the level order. All the planes feel comfortable and have their strengths, but I've been doing the best with the Flying Pancake and Hayate so far. The only plane I feel like I struggle with is Shinden, and even then, it could be a very good choice for an expert. I also have noticed that both times I made it to level 5, I played the Iron Casket stage last. One last note, on my high score run, I was excruciatingly close to reaching 1-6. I died at the boss of 1-5, and after dying, my last shots connected with the boss and triggered its explosion sequence. So close. Goal is to reach 1-7 on 1C. I'm not sure what he means with that. Views continues to reach 1-6, but man, is that level hard." So then later in the thread he says, "So after my last post of scores, I realized that most had upped the difficulty to 5. Got this middle of last week, but hadn't gotten it posted." Which, of course, then he posted a score with that. He says, "Also, yesterday got a chance to play it 2-player for the first time, and it really works well as a 2-player game. Bullet patterns and frequency seems to be exactly the same as 1-player, and the hardest change for me is that I would get confused as to which plane I was controlling, as there was so much action on the screen. The other thing I noticed about 2-player is it works better if you coordinate bomb attacks and call out power-ups during play. We did a full run-through on difficulty 4 with continues, and I can't imagine getting through some of the later stages, 1-player, 1cc. Still awesome, though." And then he says later, closing in on the 1cc difficulty, 1cc on difficulty 3. Forgot about the mini-boss's laser attack in 1.8. Yes. Haven't been to 1.8 much, but pretty consistently reach 1.7. I've settled in on using the F5U. Its excellent speed is nice, but its real bonus is its special power-up attack when charged to level 3. Works awesome on bosses, and is better than the bomb attacks. Side note, I had shown the game to my kids earlier in the month, and when I started the run, my 8-year-old daughter walks in and yells excitedly, "You're using the pancake!" Taught her well. He says, so I've been focusing my time on 2 goals, getting a 1cc on difficulty 3, very easy, and getting to 1.5 on difficulty 7, very hard. Closing in on both goals. Died on the final boss on a very easy run. Very hard isn't as crazy as you might think. It's just that everything, and I mean everything, shoots. So if you don't take out enemies extremely quick, it doesn't take long for the screen to be littered with bullets. Boss shots also move way faster. But it's really good practice for the easier difficulties, as actual enemy placement remains the same for the most part. In all of my runs, I can definitely say that the Sumi stage gives the most trouble out of the first 4, so I always hope I draw it first. Goliath is probably the easiest stage for me, but the boss battle has a different strategy if it's on 1.3 or 1.4. Then later he says, got the 1cc on difficulty 3 tonight. Surprised me, too, because I used up all my spare lives getting through the 1.7 boss, and somehow managed through 1.8 without a death. I have noticed one trick to help. On turrets, not planes or vehicles, once you get close enough to them, they will not fire, so it's advantageous to get as close as you can as soon as you can. And then Easy Racer offers some final thoughts on the game at the end of the thread. He said, sad to see this playthrough end. I feel like I could fill up a whole page of info on all the little details I noticed playing this game. But I think what drew me in the most is it contains elements that you find in other successful game genres. One of the best parts about run-and-gun shooters is just going in guns blazing and wreaking havoc. This has that. One of the best parts about racing games is knowing the track or terrain, quickly reacting to changing elements, and with each playthrough, finding ways to become just a smidge more efficient doing it. Strikers has that covered too. The aesthetics are fun too, with its World War II meets mechs vibe. The visuals and soundtrack are well done, the controls are excellent, and admittedly, I didn't notice until the last day of the month that it was analog compatible. And it's one of the first shmups where every plane seems to be balanced, letting the player truly find the one that suits their play style. I think what I like most about this game is it rewards you for taking risks, giving you lots of ways through each level depending on where you decide to go. I think if you compared all the community playthroughs on a game like Gradius 3, they'd look fairly similar in the way players approach each level. On this, I think there would be a lot of different strategies coming forth. I know I'll come back to this game at some point in the future. Besides, it's one of the few games I have that I can attempt a pacifist run, no shots fired. Thanks for the idea, Duke Togo. I think they probably discussed that during one of my streams, if I remember correctly. One last comment. I was lucky enough to play this 2-player with a friend, and it was a fantastic 2-player co-op. Other than, if you think there's a lot going on with 1 player, imagine doubling that. Thanks for introducing me to a new favorite. And that, I loved reading that on the thread because, and I know we've said this multiple times, but that is what the Shmup Club is all about. We're taking these games and we're exposing people to them. It's not just giving you and I an excuse and people in the club an excuse to pull a game off their shelf that either they've neglected or, well, I bought this, but then I never really played it. And so, well, okay, now this is a good excuse to finally play it. But this is a great example of someone jumping into a game that they hadn't heard of or that they hadn't played before, and then really gelling with it. And so I love hearing about these kinds of experiences, and I talked to Easy Racer offline during the month because he and I are friends, and he really enjoyed this game, and so I was very happy to hear that he really took to it and put a lot of time and thought into this, and so I really think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's definitely great to hear somebody discover a new favorite, or to just even sit down and enjoy a game that they've had loitering around on their shelf. I mean, this is what as you mentioned earlier, this is what the Shmup Club is all about. And even I had this thing, I had the game sitting around on my shelf for quite a while now. I had managed to pick up a PlayStation copy for probably about $5 or $10, several years ago, but I had never really touched the thing. And definitely impressed with the game there. And I am looking forward to grabbing one of the collections for the Switch and just playing on there, or even trying Tate mode, because the game, even when you're playing it on the Saturn or the PlayStation 2, it seems much more, or a much better fit to play it in Tate than to play it in Yoko.
Yes, for sure.
All right. We have, speaking of Duke Togo, we have participation notes from him. Says, I'll be in with the Saturn version. Maybe I'll stand a chance on monkey difficulty. I think you did a lot better than monkey difficulty on this one. Says, I'm hot garbage at this, but I did sneak in a few games in tonight. Next day, got a better run today, still getting a feel for which planes I prefer, but the Hayate seems pretty good. And the Hayate is, to me, I liked it, the Tomy, but it felt maybe just a little bit slow for the bullet patterns or the Danmaku light style bullet patterns that the larger enemies, the bosses would give, or the mid bosses. Maybe I just need to, as the Dark Souls players say, get good. But I stuck mostly to the flying pancake.
Yeah.
Although the mosquito seems to be calling my name right now. See, there are some levels that I'm much happier in seeing earlier in the rotation rather than later. I think it would be better balanced with just a standard level layout. I guess the upside is I don't get burned out since I don't keep hitting the same brick wall. That's one of the things that we didn't get on here, is the rotation helps keep things fresh and feel like a game on there. And even the shorter levels on there definitely are a plus to this game. It's a much more focused than what you normally... I feel like with some of the Gradius 3 levels I was playing through, like, does this thing have an end? It feels like it's going on forever. I've been in the... where you're going through the spaghetti meatball stage?
Oh, yeah.
On there, the volcano and stuff, and you're just going through it, just drilling through all that stuff. That part felt like it dragged on. Where all this stuff is the game style. It moves at a quick, brisk pace, and before you know it, you're moving on to something else. And no particular stage overstays its welcome.
Absolutely.
Later post by Duke Togo says, I just wanted to experience the whole game. I just got clear on monkey difficulty. Well, congratulations. I really enjoy playing the game this way, as it's a lot of fun just to shoot things. Oh, I definitely agree. I'd like to see someone have at it. Maybe someone will give that a go for blazing lasers.
Foreshadowing. So Vic Viper Mark II jumped in and says, oh yes, I'm in for sure. And then we didn't see him for, other than in my streams, we didn't see him for about half the month, but he posted halfway through the month, and he says, well, after a ton of practice with all 6 planes, I finally managed to 1cc it on the second loop on normal difficulty. Despite liking the Mosquito more, I ended up with getting more points with the Hayate instead. To be fair, they're both very balanced, but the Mosquito is more direct with its fast missiles. Once the second loop starts, you're glued to your seat. Everything becomes memorization. This was especially hard for the slower planes like the Focke-Wulf and the Lightning, both of which I had to run through multiple times before I got the hang of it. So, a big congratulations to you, Vic, for a 2-loop, 1-all of the game, or 2-all, I guess you could say. And I think you're the only one who, in the playthrough, who actually made it through or even made it to the second loop. I don't think the rest of us were hardy enough to accomplish that.
Well, congratulations! I definitely couldn't do it. Maybe I just need to start playing some more of Gradius 3 Arcade and to get good enough, and then head back to this game. And go, geez, this game's easy compared to Gradius 3.
Yeah, but none of the planes in Strikers 1945 are slow enough that it makes you feel like you're swimming in pudding, like the Vic Viper's default speed.
Yeah, it's almost like it. I swear, with those games on there, as we mentioned, like Rolling Across the Stars, it's almost like it's got a parking boot on or something, or someone left with the parking brake on, flies the spaceship, just takes off. We've got another participant here, Mr. Stubbs. I'm not very good at shmups, but I'm in on this one. I'll be playing the Switch version. Later post. I've been able to make it to third level a few times. I feel like I'm improving in every attempt, so hopefully that continues. And thank you for joining us and giving this game a shot. I'm glad you enjoyed playing it. It's definitely a game that, as I mentioned, is you could get up a little, pick up and play, and you could get it. Even playing a couple levels, you get a lot of enjoyment out of. And hopefully you join us for our next shmup in August here, and give that a try as well. It is definitely I should say, I would call it a modern classic. What would you call it?
Yeah, that's probably a good way to put it. And then finally, participation-wise, we had Coin Tengoku, who says, "Hey guys, count me in on this one. I'll be playing it on MAME." And he responded to Mr. Stubbs and says, "No need to be good, Mr. Stubbs," which we definitely echo. And then he offered some final thoughts at the end of the thread and says, "I might be too late for the podcast, but here is my last stretch on Strikers 1945 2. And he posted a score with that. It's a tough game to strategize other than getting lucky. I noticed that bullets were sometimes faster on some levels than others on some of my runs with the same ship. I barely got to 1-7 and died right away. But I still got to 1-7. But it took me all month. Overall, I kind of got used to playing it, even though the bullets were hard to see at first. I think it was pretty fun and would recommend it to shmup players. And I wonder if noticing that some bullets were faster on some levels than on others using the same plane, if some of that might have been a rank situation where he might have been ranked up and the bullets were really fast, and then in other areas he was ranked down so they didn't seem as fast.
Yeah, I mean, the bullets move pretty fast in general in this game.
That's true.
And so if you aren't prepared for it, it could catch you a little bit unawares. Most people have played some sort of Gradius game, and that one you can see the bullets. It's hard to move out of the way of them, but you can see them. In Psycho games, I think Sir Flash mentioned on there, some of these bullets stay on screen for like one frame, and that's it. So this stuff really flies through.
Yeah.
All right. Would you like to take us through the high scores of the month?
Sure. On the monkey difficulty, I got a 1cc, and I had a score of 1,232,900 points. And I put my score here because it's the only one that was posted in the thread for monkey that was this high. I know Duke Togo got a clear on monkey, but he only posted his end screen and not his score. So I can only assume that he wasn't either happy with it or didn't care to post the score. And I think I'm the only one who posted a score on the child difficulty level as well. I managed to get the 1cc of that and got 1,160,800 points. On difficulty 3, or very easy, Easy Racer, as we mentioned before, got the 1cc and got 1,170,300 points. Easy Racer also, incidentally, had the highest score on difficulty 4, or easy, with 497,800 points, and he made his goal of getting to 1.5 on that. And then on normal, of course, as we mentioned before, Vic Viper got the 2-all, and he ended up with 2,486,400 points. And then on very hard difficulty, since Easy Racer mentioned that, he actually made it to 1.5 on very hard and ended up with 464,400 points. So really good participation through the month from everybody, and especially Easy Racer with so many scores being submitted and kind of sweeping the scoreboard a little bit there. Now, I don't have it in the outline, but I wanted to make special mention of someone who happened to be posting scores for Strikers 1945-2 during the course of the month, and that is a Japanese player known as DBS. And the Twitter handle is ridiculously long and a little bit difficult, but it's at DBSQAWSEDRFTGYH. I'm not 100% sure what that all stands for, but apparently this person is a highly skilled Strikers player, because they have gone through and beat Strikers 1945-2 multiple times and was using the Mosquito during the course of the month. And on, July 25th, managed to break through a score barrier that apparently hadn't been done before, which was 3.4 million. And so they got 3,408,700 points using the Mosquito, and then a couple of days later, or just a couple of days ago, I guess at this point, got 3,430,000 points. And so, as far as I know, that's kind of the highest competition score in the game, and I believe that DBS is doing that on real arcade hardware, because that's kind of the normal thing in Japan, is to do that competition on the arcade board. But I'm not 100% sure about that. But anyway, I thought that was kind of neat that DBS was doing that during the month that we were actually focusing on the game, and managed to break that score goal during that time. And so I thought that was kind of just a neat little side thing that I would throw in there. Honorable mention.
It's pretty impressive.
Very impressive, yeah.
Can you break down your final thoughts for this game?
Yeah. One thing that I haven't mentioned about Strikers 1945-2 is that I've owned this game for a long time. It's actually the very first import video game that I ever purchased. I bought it from National Console Support way back in probably 99 or 2000, and it was still sealed when I got it. I paid full price. I still have it complete with the Obi, and it kind of started what I will call my love-hate relationship with Saikyo shmups. I enjoy the games in terms of their design and how they play and all of that, but I have a difficult time with the, as we kind of mentioned, the sort of quasi-Danmaku sort of thing, where it rides that line between a traditional shoot-'em-up and a Danmaku by having fast bullet patterns that come at you that are more difficult to dodge. Not because the patterns are super dense, necessarily, although there are a few that are a little dense, but because the hitboxes on the planes are a little bit larger. So unlike a true Danmaku game, something like a Cave style or Crimson Clover or that kind of a thing, most of the plane is your hitbox. And so you're a lot more vulnerable than you would be in some other games of this type. So I've never quite got on very well with Psycho games and with Strikers 1945-2 in particular. So in a way, I'm glad that we revisited the game, or that I revisited the game this last month, because it gave me an opportunity or an excuse to really focus on the game and try to get good at it, try to play it in a manner that was much more focused and less casual than what I've done in the past. I was happy to get the clear on Monkey and on Child. I think with a little bit more practice, I probably could get the clear on Very Easy. Beyond that, I don't know. It might take more effort, but I'm glad I revisited it because it gave me a little bit more insight into the design ethos that Psycho had for their games, and makes me think that with a little bit more practice and, focusing on these kinds of games more, that maybe I'll have better luck at them. So a game of theirs that I like more, or that I've enjoyed more, such as Gunbird 2 or Dragon Blaze, I might actually stand a pretty good chance of getting a reasonable first loop clear in one of those games, even if it's not on the normal difficulty level. So it's given me more of an appreciation for Psycho than perhaps I had previously.
Definitely well said. I echo those statements and say that it's Psycho games are something that I haven't played a lot of before, but it's so interesting to see their approach. Stuff that's not quite, as we mentioned before, not quite Danmaku, but not quite standard shmup, and it's its own thing, and it's done well enough that anytime I died, I wasn't frustrated at the game, but more so I thought frustrated with my lack of skill. And seeing how people are able to overcome this definitely gives me cause for wanting to go back and trying different chips, such as a mosquito, try again with a mosquito, or maybe even try a little bit more with a Hayate, and see if I can find something that works for me. It's interesting that the pathing, although a lot of it's fixed, it can be changed up a little bit more than what you get in your standard STG or Danmaku game. I definitely like the aesthetic of it and the music. Well, I'm having trouble pulling up any of the tracks out of the top of my head. Definitely didn't make me want to reach for my CD player or my MP3 player. It's a well done game that knows what it is, and I would definitely highly recommend it to anybody who was interested in shmups, because it has a barrier of entry, but it's not high enough where it's going to equal frustration. And that, to me, is something that this game is something to me that everybody who is interested in these types of games should play.
Absolutely. And I think Strikers 1945-2 is an ideal entry point into the Psycho canon, if you'll pardon the pun. It's a good introduction to their games, and a strong entry in, their list of STGs. And so it's a good place to start if you're looking to kind of explore Psycho's shoot-'em-up library.
Yeah, I'd say that or Gunbird.
Yeah.
But we'll get to Gunbird another time. Speaking of getting to next shmup, our shmup for August is Blazing Lasers, aka Gunhead, for the TurboGrafx 16 and the PC Engine. In September, we are going with, I believe it's our first Sega shmup.
It is. Yeah, it is Zaxxon, which of course was originally released in arcades in 1982, I believe, and then received versions on many home platforms, such as the ColecoVision, which is relatively well known. A unique Atari 2600 version. It was also on the Intellivision, Atari's 8-bit computer line. There's a relatively good version on the Commodore 64 that I actually remember playing as a kid because my neighbor had that. Then on the PS2, the Sega Genesis collection, that is available on that. And then the arcade version is also on the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection that was out on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. So lots of choices there. And one other thing to note is the TurboGrafx Blazing Lasers version is available as a downloadable on the Wii U eShop. So for those of you who don't own a TurboGrafx or a PC Engine, that is another way to access that game, so that you can join us for August.
Yeah, aside from asking Kanye West for help. We'd like to thank everybody who helped make this a great participation month, as well as Sir Flash of Studio Muttprints for the Studio Muttprints Bullet Heaven for the logo.
Yes, and of course, we've mentioned it every month, and we're going to keep mentioning it. We do have t-shirts. I'm wearing mine right now, as I always do when we record the podcast. And you can go to redbubble.com and search for Shoot the Core or Shoot the Core-cast, and this will be a top result. And buy a t-shirt, wear it proudly. They come in many different colors, so you can choose your favorite and represent the podcast. Spread the word.
Also like to thank Kogosu for the intro and outro music, the RF Generation Playcast, and the RF Generation Beat, the licensed NES library group. And also like to thank some guy named MetalFRO for streaming and all he does for the Shmup Club of the Month.
Why, thank you. Yes. Make sure you check me out on YouTube. I'm on Twitter as Game Boy Guru. I'm on Twitch as Guru Game Boy. And I'm also, just as of today, as I'm rebuilding my streaming box, which kind of took a nosedive the last couple of days, I am now signed up on Mixer. So I'm going to be streaming on Mixer as well as Game Boy Guru. So if Mixer is your jam...
Chasing that ninja money.
Well, probably not because I don't play Fortnite, but maybe we'll get a stray viewer or two on Mixer who are into retro or shoot-'em-ups.
You never know, but the more people playing shmups, the better.
Who knows? Maybe people will watch me streaming Zaxxon on Mixer and decide that I'm the next ninja.
Only if you Zax on, then Zax off.
Exactly.
If you made it this far into the podcast, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy.
Yes. We will see you next time.